Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of HR Voices podcast. I am Mary Asante, your host, and with me here is my co-host, Charlotte Allfrey. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi there.
We have the wonderful pleasure of being joined by Mark Lumley. Mark is a partner of Freeths LLP. Freeths is a legal partner of HRI and have been since we launched in 2020. Very supportive. We run regular webinars with them, very informative as well. So if you've not attended any of those webinars, please sign up and attend the webinar. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Great, excellent. Really looking forward to this conversation because this is part of our mini series, which is looking at building resilience into your consultancy business. And we are talking to other guests, looking at how you can build resilience into your consultancy through the well-being lens effectively. And then we've also looked at how you can build resilience through your organization. And we looking at the marketing lens. And now with Mark, we are looking at the legal aspects of how you can build resilience into your business. So Mark, would you sort of introduce yourself and tell people a bit more about you, about Freeths, and how, to...
Sure. So my name is Mark Lumley. Easy to remember because we just have to remember Joanna. So there we go. I'm a consultant at Freeths. I deal with commercial and technology related work. What that means in practice is helping businesses and individuals running businesses get a grip on the core thing that is a business, which is creating, protecting and increasing value. That's what a business is about. So that's a bit of a different thing to people's personal roles and work life. Generally, if they're working for other people, running your own business is a bit of a different thing. And keeping that at the top of the list is quite important. So my background is that my family have been involved in running business. My father, having left school at 14, as many of his generation did post-war, started working as a builder and became a successful owner of his own small building business, construction business. So we grew up living on building sites and understanding what hard work looked like from a young age from my dad and my mum, both of whom worked and brought up a family at the same time, like most of us. So I sort of come from that kind of a background. I was always interested in business, always interested in working in that sort of independent sort of environment. I did a law degree, but I also then had what my tech friends call a proper job, and I worked for IBM for a period of time. That was a really interesting experience. I learned a lot about business process, about how large organizations worked. I was there early 90s, probably very early 90s might be the best way of describing that. And internally, they already had things like a nascent kind of internet and ability to communicate on a different level than smaller organizations and even quite a lot of organizations have now. So they were obviously at the time one of the leading technology businesses in the world and had all of this sort of capability internally. So that was really quite interesting to be in. I still enjoyed law and enjoyed sort of dealing with the challenges that brings and the complexities that come along with that. And over time, I've sort of put that together with my own reading and curiosity around pretty much everything and sort of got to grips with a few sort of ideas along the way. I also realised that I did a little note to myself, tried to work out roughly how many businesses I've engaged with over the years. So I won't tell you exactly how many years I've been qualified and a lawyer, but I reckon that I've been involved with about 3,000 different businesses, from some of the very largest businesses on the planet down to people starting up their own business. I've also, as a partner and one of the owners of a law firm, been involved in running and operating a business or parts of a business myself, so understand some of the sort of challenges really. So I thought it was probably sensible to start off with what is a business, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, but I'll say it again because it's really crucial, I think, which is that a business is there to create, protect and increase value. So this is not just a replacement for your income necessarily, although that's absolutely fine. It's about creating value, having something that you can point at and say, this is worth more to me, because it's me that's valuing it, the individual running the business or individuals running the business, than if I was working for somebody else. And that's really important to get to have in mind. I think that will fit quite well with the sort of the well-being and the sort of mindfulness sort of perspective that will have come from others. Not precisely what they've said, but my guess is that would fit quite well with it. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely. And I think it's quite impressive. Over 3,000 businesses. That is really impressive. And maybe one day we can do an episode just on talking about the details of these sort of businesses, because I think it will be very interesting and we can probably lots of lessons learned from that. And thank you for that succinct definition of what a business is, which is sort of the creation of value, protecting and increasing the value. And it's really important that you've touched on things that in our world, the HR and people consultancy world, you find a very varied range of, yes, I'm running my consultancy to get a bit of money in, lifestyle type thing, and to get enough income to cover my bills and stuff, to I'm running a serious, a proper business where I'm worried about the value creation, the turnover, the income, and all those sorts of things that most businesses worry about. But like you said, it's okay if you're at the end where it's a lifestyle business, it fits around your commitments and everything, and it's really working for you. And it's also okay if you have that ambition to grow your business and to make it sort of create value and to increase the value of your business. So that is really important. So I think the question that I would ask is, so when you thought about, right, I want to create or start my business and you started it, what are the sort of things that you should be thinking about before you start running? Should you start walking first, crawling first, or should you just run anyway?
Well, I think sort of events tend to take people over anyway. So, and that's sort of, something we all experience in life, really. So I'm going to get rid of the remaining little bits of psychology out of the way, and we'll get to some of the law in a minute. I promise. So there's a little bit of information I think that's really useful that we all, when we think about it, kind of know, but kind of forget, which is you can't do it all. You cannot do it all. In life, you can't do it all. If you do a list of all of the activities you've got to cover this week, next week, and do a to-do list, you won't get through your to-do list. I've never met anybody who comes in and goes, do you know what? I've completed my to-do list. I have absolutely nothing to do today. That just doesn't happen. And when you're running your own business, that sort of is in spades. So organisation and prioritisation are really important skills for that. So that's sort of, I guess, the kind of psychology bit out of the way that we just need to keep in mind. And it's important because otherwise you can get overwhelmed. And I think prioritising, working out what's important, really useful. So there's a sobering bit as well that I just wanted to mention on a commercial basis. And of course, I'm a commercial lawyer and a technology lawyer. So the commercial bit is really key when you're looking at business. And the statistics are that most businesses fail because of lack of management of cash flow. So right at the heart of the business, if you're looking at risk and you're looking at reward and how you do things, first thing to write at the top of your list is cash flow. So how am I going to ensure that I maintain cash flow in my business? How do I make sure that the value that I'm trying to create and protect is properly respected by my clients and customers? How do I get from where I am now to a business that's got a nice stable flow of income, and I'm managing the work well, and I'm prioritizing activities? Part of that is around the legal work that needs to be in place, or the understanding of law and contractual engagement that needs to be in place for business. And that sort of framework is really important for a few different reasons. If you don't have the right structure, if that structure doesn't fit with the strategy you've got, and you don't prioritize the right things, you don't put the right processes in place, then the chances of you managing to maintain cash flow and business and your reputation and all of these things that matter is going to be radically reduced. So it's really important to get a grip on that. So I will start with structure. I will start with what is the right structure for running the business and the organization. Many people trade off their own name, and that's fine. There are some advantages to brand, there are some advantages to own name, but it's really important to understand the three basic possibilities in terms of legal structure for a business. So the first is individual. So that means you've got personal liability. If anything goes wrong, it's you that gets sued. There's a lack of brand identity if it's just you personally. Sometimes that's useful when you're starting out to be able to associate it with you and the quality of what you've provided to other people. But over time, you might want to think about brand. Potentially it limits growth, because you can't have a legal entity that's you. You personally can employ somebody else, but it becomes very complex and very difficult from a tax perspective. There's difficulties where work and wider personal arrangements meet when you're an individual, because if people think that they're employing you to do something, or then they see you as available to them all of the time, irrespective of whether that's appropriate or not. You still need to file a tax return, and your tax return is going to get more complex. So you're not really saving much in terms of accounting engagement or costs. So generally speaking, I like people to think about moving from that structure relatively early on and living with the pain and the cost and the additional complexity that comes with something a bit more complex. So the next option is partnership. Now, partnership's been around as a legal concept for forever, but the partnership legislation goes back all the way back into the 1890s, Partnership Act originally. So that's more than one person acting collectively. They have joint and severable liability. What does that mean? Well, it means that either one of you can be sued, either one of you can potentially commit the partnership. So that becomes very problematic. You know, anybody who's ever had a sibling or a best friend and even just wanted to decide which movie to go and see and, you know, who's paying for the popcorn becomes tricky. So running a business in a partnership is quite difficult. Lawyers know a lot about that because we often operate in partnerships. That sort of tends to end up as a limited liability partnership and often other structures, but that's just an accident of history, really. There's a lot of default rules that sit in the Partnership Act, and as I said, that goes back a long way. And it's also fertile ground for disputes. Partnerships regularly end up in disputes. So I don't find that generally a good structure. So that leaves you with a limited liability company. Big advantages. One, it's got separate legal personality. It's like having another entity, another person. It allows limitation on personal liability. So it's the business that's contracting, it's not you personally. And that's quite an important thing. It's also useful, I think, practically to be able to make that distinction between you individually providing services through the company and the company being responsible for the services. It allows you to grow, it allows you to employ the people easier, it's got a variety of advantages. It is more administratively complex, but not massively so. It also comes with some director's duty obligations, but those are substantially common sense and substantially about honesty and integrity. So those are things that the HR professional community understand because they deal with what happens when people aren't honest or they don't have integrity as part of, you know, the day job. So you know what all of that looks like. It also allows for brand building, and you don't have to have the same brand name as a limited company. There's a whole host of options with that. So I think that's a very useful thing to have in mind. What's the earliest point in time I can put the right structure in place and differentiate between me as a person and my business?
I think thank you, Mark. That's very important. I think thinking about the structure. Years ago, as part of a mini MBA program that I did, they did say, start the way you mean to go off. So start with your end in mind. And thinking about the structure very early on enables you to do that. And I think some of the advantages of going down the limited company routes or partnership routes and the rest of it is when, depending on who your customers are, sometimes some clients are more comfortable dealing with entities than they are dealing with individuals. So it has got definitely its advantages. And we I think when we're taking our members through our accreditation process, it's part of what we look at, the structure, how they have set up their consultancy business to make sure that they've done a proper setup. So that is really good and a great reminder of having your structure in mind at the very beginning, rather than when you've done something for too long, you get set in your ways, and just undoing it and going down a different route can be challenging.
Yeah, and just on that sort of I'm drifting back into psychology again, but it can be quite lonely running a business or organization, and we've all got into that sort of situation, I think, where we've got a lot to do. Have we got time to put this in place, to organize things? But it's important to make that time to do that. And I think something that a friend of mine did, which really stuck in my mind and just popped back in my head now, is that even though when they set up as a single person consultancy, they held board meetings and they invited one of us to attend the board meeting, even though there was just one of them, to talk through what they were doing and their strategy and so on, and to commit that to writing, to say, this is the plan, this is what I'm going to try and achieve, and I'm going to come back in 12 months' time, I'm going to have a look at that. And this is the calendar, the year that we have planned. These are the things that we're going to have to set aside time for on a procedural and an organizational basis. So that was a very useful exercise, because I was able to then go, oh, well, hang on a minute, how much time are you setting aside to sort out your contracts and organise your legal work? And well, do we have to do that? And the answer was yes, you do. And shortly I'll explain why we need to do that. But it was a really good discipline, and I thought that was really good. And buddying up with other people and being part of a community like HRI is a real advantage in that context, because you can help each other out, and you can go, okay, well, will you be my kind of stalking horse for ideas, or come and sort of sit with me for an hour and let me talk through what I'm planning to do, and you can do that for each other. So that's a good thing.
Sounds like a really good idea, actually. I've not heard that before, but it gives you accountability, and it helps you make sure you get that groundwork and that structure in place. It does seem to be, we have a variety of members who make certain decisions and choices about how they're going to structure their business. Like Mary, I was very much in the beginning, I absolutely wanted to go in with a limited company. I didn't want the liability. I wanted the separation. I wanted the option to decide what I was going to do with my business in the future. So I did have the end in mind. But some people don't, and they just want to run, a very simple consultancy, individual style business, and that's fine. But that's a great idea. I think that's definitely a top tip.
I like the buddy system anyway. In other areas of life, I think it's a lot easier to do things. And I've read quite a lot of times in different contexts, that idea that, if you say something, you're more likely to do it. Once you get it out of your head. If you then write it down, you're more likely to do it. If you then explain to somebody else, you're even more likely to do it. So each of these things are positive reinforcement, and I think that's quite important. So we talked about you can't do it all, and also this idea of sort of budding up, and that leads on, I think, to a really important point for me, which is that even a one-person business is a team. It's still a team game. So, and I always come back to this sort of thing that I've heard myself saying this so often, I can hear it in my head before I say it now, which is that if you go into the boardroom of some of the biggest, most complex businesses on earth, you'll meet some amazing people. You'll meet some of the smartest people you've ever met. But when you look around the room, you'll see that they've got 7 or 8 skills. And to run that business, even at a strategic level, they probably need 15. And that's true of the largest organizations. In the room, they do not have all of the skills to run, even at a strategy level, the organization of which they are the leaders. That should give everybody a bit of comfort, because the same is also true of somebody running a business on their own or with just a few people and getting started in this sort of space. So we don't have the complexity of these huge organizations like Amazon or whoever, but we also have the same situation of limited skills. So that means that you've got to import skills. They have to, you have to. And that's a really important thing to keep in your head again, which is, kind of, if the biggest organizations on earth have to import skills, I have to. Not I might have to, or I can fiddle around the edges of things, but I have to import skills to get things done well. There are shortcuts. There are things you can do yourself and adapt and use. And HRI represents a massive shortcut because there's lots of content available for HRI members. I've seen some of that content. I've had a look at it, and there's more coming, which is really useful. That gives you those shortcuts, those starting point documentation and information that you're allowed to use. And it's important that, because people are often tempted to go and have a hoof around on the internet or use some AI chatbot or something to try and produce some documentation. That doesn't necessarily stand up, and it doesn't necessarily work because it's not been created mindfully, thoughtfully for the purpose that you're intending to achieve. It also doesn't fit with the ideas around business process management and the kind of standards that people expect from you. So I was going to talk a little bit about what sort of customers expect from you, where you need to get started with that, and then look at sort of process and documentation and what you should actually have, so we can get into some of the nitty-gritty of it, if that's okay. So I think of this as sort of documents, processes, and pitfalls. So there's three sort of things going.
Yeah.
And if you look at the documentation side of things, there's a basic bit of law everybody should understand, which is copyright. So if somebody else has created something, they own the copyright in it if it's a substantial thing. So terms of business, a document, a form, etc. Most of the time, copyright just comes into existence. It's a right that just exists. It's not something that you have to register or anything. That's quite important. It can be quite embarrassing if you just copy somebody else's work, as it were, and they call you out on that. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So that's quite important. So this idea of just grabbing stuff from the internet and using somebody else's stuff doesn't work. There's nothing wrong with being inspired by what other people do and what good looks like, but direct copying isn't appropriate. Of course, if you're in HRI, you already have the bank of templates and things to work from. And also, they're a jumping off point. So it's easy to adapt those and to do very little bit of work to adapt them and to make them work. And we might run some workshops perhaps around that to see how we could sort of work together to get them working well. So what is it that a customer wants from you? So the customer obviously wants to buy you as a person, have confidence in your capabilities and your organization's capabilities and experience. And everybody's able to explain what that is for themselves. So, and they're the best salesperson for that. But then the businesses that you deal with, some of them are going to be substantially larger than your organizations, are going to then expect that you will comply with and fit with their systems and process-driven world. So that means that you will have an information security policy, you will have a data protection policy or privacy notice, you will have an understanding of their purchase order systems and processes. You will go through any client sort of supplier onboarding type arrangements that they want to put in place or have in place. So they've got all of that administrative additional burden and cost to engagement. So you may as well do that well once, get that set up once and have a clear set of documentation. It needs to be realistic. It needs to be something that doesn't contain onerous or over-the-top obligations on a customer, because they're not going to fly. You're going to end up with a lot of friction in the process of onboarding a customer if they're going to work off your documentation. If, as often is the case, they want you to work on their documentation, then you need to at least have the toolkit to understand which bits of what is presented to you represents a risk or a challenge to you. And that's really important, because without sort of being able to get to grips with that relatively quickly and get past the initial engagement with the customer and get them to be a paying customer, they are just a prospect. They're not your client, they're a prospect. And that's a really important distinction for me. And in the consulting environment, where most of the time we're charging for time, sometimes we're charging for the value of our time, but we're really charging for time. Same with lawyers, same with accountants. Most of the time, that's the way we're working. And even though people say, sort of, we should move away from time-based systems, etc., we're still having the same conversation. It's a bit like the conversation about email. A decade ago, people said email is dead, it will be gone. Here we are, all sending emails to each other, probably more than we've ever done in the past. So, it's taking time to disappear, isn't it? And time as a measure of value, it is still lying around. So for a consultant, one of the problems is that you get an engagement with a customer, you start talking to them, you get pulled into conversations, you start engaging with them, they send you some information, you send them some information, you get busy trying to deal with solving their initial problem. And because you haven't got your processes set up and your documentation, everything ready to go, then it's the job that you might get to at the weekend or the next week, it gets put off. And by the time you've got the engagement in place and the information about sort of what things might cost and how you work and a proper client onboarding put in place, you've already spent a lot of time and effort that should properly be chargeable time and effort. So getting that set up in the right way is important. What that means is to start out with the contract process and to look at the idea of a proposal first. So if you look at how you engage with the client, it might be somebody you've dealt with before, it might be new business to you, a variety of different scenarios. But if you're starting out with a proposal and you have a proposal document, very simple proposal document that references standard terms, and the standard terms are visible somewhere that people can look at, then you're already halfway there. You're already able to say, this is how we work, this is what I do. And you can make that really simple. It can be a form, it can be in a letter, it can be in a text, it can be in an email. It doesn't really matter. Just as long as you set up that proposition and you also reference your standard terms of business as the starting point in your proposal documentation.
Yep.
That's really useful to do.
I think some critical things that you've touched on there, which is in terms of your customers' expectations and having your processes, your documents, and then sort of knowing the pitfalls or the risks that you are sort of dealing with as a consultancy, as a business owner, engaging clients and stuff like that is quite important. You have touched on things that we all fall, again, as consultants, every now and again, victims too, which is you can spend several hours of your time prospecting, having conversations upon conversations. And by the time actually that project comes in, if you do a critical analysis of the time spent you probably know that this is a lost leader if it's really not profitable. And it won't become profitable if you choose to ignore the work that you've done upfront before the project came in. So I do think that it's very important to be mindful that even if you are charging for the value you are delivering, it's still time that you spent delivering that. So we need to be mindful of how we spend our time and make sure that it's valuable time and it's of use and of value to us and our clients, I think.
I think it's definitely the case. I think the other thing is showing the value. So quite often I get clients when they're setting up their sort of documentation to show the time that they're spending, to put that forward to the client, even if they put nil cost against it, that's not the same as value. So being able to say, okay, so onboarding and client setup, 4 hours of time, anticipated costs, X amount of money. But because I love you, client, and because this is going to be a long-term relationship and we're going to be working on a framework basis for many, engagements to come, I'll put that at nil, or £100 or whatever, a discount of some kind. But not being afraid to show the engagement that you and the time and effort that you're putting in, and put the value of it down, even if you don't charge for that. The other thing, of course, is, and this is one of the reasons why a limited company is easier to sometimes, is that we're most of us grew up in an environment where we were told to be sort of helpful towards other people and to be positive about all of these things. And that, of course, our natural inclination, if somebody says, "Can you help me with this?" is to say yes. That we're all, psychologically all geared up to do that. That obviously isn't necessarily always quite the right thing to do, say. Sometimes you need to take a breath. So this is, again, how the process helps, because you can say, okay, let me put my proposal together. I'll send you that. I'll be in contact with you, tell them when, and then get it done. And that's really useful. Just to go back to the client expectations thing. So I have a little sort of shopping list for this, which I think is interesting to think about. So first of all, client expectations of a professional supplier, one that impresses them, that you are coming to them with a proposition. You know how much things cost, what it takes to do. You don't go, "Oh, well, I'll come back to you about it." You've got it set up. You already know what you're doing. You know where you're going. You know the roadmap. That you've got your insurances in place and you've got the summary of that available to provide. That you do have your policies and procedures available, but also perhaps you've got a simple FAQ of, not all small organizations are easy to engage with. We know that, but we're a professional organization. We've been there, seen it and done it. We have the following policies. Here they are. They cover all the ground you need to have covered. That's really important. Those really simple, really positive statements about what you're providing them with. That gives them a lot of comfort. They can see it in one place, on one piece of A4 or one screen. They can see that information. The other thing is, what are their worries about engaging with you? Well, if you're a one-person band, what happens if you're ill? Do you have any backup? Do you have a plan for that? Kind of the deemed employment risk, which for HR independence, obviously, it's kind of ironic that one of the issues that a client might have with you is, hang on a minute, if is this person going to end up as an employee? So having a documentation set up so you genuinely are a consulting service business, and/or that you close those issues out, quite important, really. Bear in mind what you do. So data protection, privacy, information security, being able to say, we use this and this. These are the standards that are in place. We have a VPN for our engagement with communication. We have we only use the following software and services. We clear what our processes are. Also going into meetings, I always think it's interesting, or going on the train, it's always interesting. I don't know if you're going to put this on, but I have one of these.
Yep.
Yeah, that is a really, I don't know if it's a really high or a really low distraction screen. And that if you're sitting next to me, you can't see what I'm looking at. Now, I'm not that I'm working on in private, in a public space necessarily, but just being able to show those little bits of effort, little bit of extra thought around those kind of things, and being able to sort of have a proper information security plan that looks sensible and that fits with what a customer might want to see. That's something that people really struggle with, because they go, "Oh, information security, that's something I don't really know about that. That's difficult. Cybersecurity is really difficult." I know, Mary, you know loads about that. So, but but most people don't. And, but also people misunderstand how simple it can be if you break it down and you just go through the basics of, what network do we have? How do we communicate? What software do we use? What equipment do we have? How do we make sure that other people can't see and engage with that? How do we get rid of this stuff once we've used it? Do we have a policy to dump it? All of that stuff. So it's basic stuff, working through it. It's the kind of stuff that can be workshopped and relatively easily. So I think
it's actually, can I just sort of cut in there and just say, and actually it's something that we always try and encourage with our members to go through our accreditation process, because it's what we absolutely want to encourage them to do. We want to encourage them to demonstrate how amazing they are and that they do have all this great foundation stuff in place, because it sets them apart from, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of consultants in the UK, but actually it gives them an opportunity to set themselves apart and say, look, you know, I have got all these things in place. I have thought about these things, and I do have this structure behind me. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted and felt very strongly that the accreditation within HRI was something that we absolutely wanted to celebrate.
It's a really good thing. And, you know, that thing that HRI have of community and rigor to it is really important, you know, because ultimately this is about having confidence in what you're doing and clients having confidence in how you approach things. So if that can, you know, if you can step into the client's perspective, you know, well, you know, what would I want to see? What would good look like? What would great look like? You know, and just do that. And if those are things that are difficult to do or not quite in your wheelhouse, not quite one of your 8 skills around your 15-skill boardroom table of one person, then, you know, bring in some expertise, look at HRI, look at the people in the background that support HRI. And it's a good way to think about it.
I think one other thing around the data protection, data security things that consultants sort of deal with on a daily basis is this concept of how long data retention, really, how long people keep data from. And I think when you're engaging with your clients, it's very important that you make it clear what data you keep and what you don't keep. Because when a client gets a subject access request, more and more consultants are being pulled into, I know my company or my employer used you as a consultant. Can you provide this information? So it's very important that we make that very clear to our customers and our clients in managing the expectation, what we do, what we keep, and what we don't keep. And also registration with ICO, for example, as an HR consultant is very important. Every now and again, you see the question, do I need to be ICO registered because I'm just running my consultancy and I don't keep any data?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right with that. I mean, I think there's another thing that's really important from a legal perspective, and this is useful to jot down if anybody's listening to this, just to put it and then stick it or something wherever you keep information, which is to understand legal privilege. And this is a really important concept in terms of engagement with anything that could go wrong or where somebody might ask for information. So the only people who have the right to legal privilege are lawyers, which obviously is a good thing as a lawyer. You know, accountants don't, other consultants don't, experts don't, businesses don't, clients don't. Lawyers have it. There is some very rare exceptions in relation to litigation, but in any event, that sort of is the bedrock of it. So understanding the advisory line that you shouldn't cross and where you need to get your client or your organization engaging with a lawyer to make sure that legal privilege is part of the process is really important, because it's so easy to step over that line from advising on policy process, how to engage with a particular circumstance, to, okay, we're now in a situation which is potentially very contentious or maybe litigious or may end up in an employment tribunal or could end up in you know, quite a difficult situation. In those circumstances, the confidentiality won't help. You know, it's legal privilege that's the mainstay around that. If a lawyer's instructed to advise, then potentially that sort of privilege is available in relation to that advice. And also, the lawyer is then able to potentially instruct people as experts, and for that expert advice to become part of that sort of legal privilege umbrella. There's more complexity to that. I'm not going to get into that, but that's an important principle to keep in mind. We see all the time situations where people have gone too far.
It's a really good thing to highlight, because for HRI's help desk, for example, we do work very closely with the employment team, Amanda and Len, with the support of that. So as a member, when you put a query through, asking for that second view, second opinion, and you do get that confidentiality through the help desk and through that as well. So it's very important to highlight that again, another great benefit of HRI membership and sort of what we do give to our community. So.
Just on the information thing, the other thing is that, and this is another thing to put on a post-it, I think, and this is probably not a very politically correct way of describing this anymore, but I always describe this as my granny test. So the person who, growing up, I was always most careful around, and also, and you know, kind of in terms of how I behaved, and so was my grandmother. I think that's probably a common experience in life, but you know, kind of, if you wouldn't say it to your grandmother, if you wouldn't write it and send it to your grandmother, if she was the recipient, don't do it. Don't do it. And we've all said daft things. We've all said things at the end of a call or a conversation or in the middle of something, or, you know, kind of, or jotted something down. Dangerous. The other thing is that if you're sending an email that's potentially contentious or difficult, don't put who you're going to send it to in the top bar until you've completed it and you're happy with it. If you're uncertain, send it to yourself. Read it. The other thing is, read it aloud. I get trainees to do this all the time. They think I'm mad, but once I've done it 2 or 3 times, they do the same, which is I go and find a room somewhere and I read it aloud. Does it sound right? Because it just engages a different bit of your brain. What looks right on paper when you read it in your head and when you read it aloud is different. How many times when you've read something aloud have you realized, oh, actually, there's 2 there's in the same sentences there, and your eye skips past it because it doesn't expect to see it. So that's a really useful thing to do. And especially if you're responsible, it's your business and you're writing something that other people are going to rely on, that little bit of extra care is really useful. You're not going to get it right all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say things you don't mean. You're going to say things that aren't quite as correct as you might like them to be. We live in a world where everybody's sensitive to that. And I should probably rephrase it and not call it the granny test anymore. But my grandmother's no longer around, unfortunately, to give me a clip around the ear and tell me to, you know, get on with some work. But in any event, it does stick in my head, and I do think that's quite a useful thing just to have in mind. And that sort of engagement process with clients, we talked about things that clients might expect and what we might look to see. That sort of early engagement documentation, getting that right. The difference between a proposal, a quote, and an estimate. This is one of those things that if I ask this in a room full of people, sort of try to do the 2 things that we all try to do at once, which is on the one hand, look as though they know the answer. On the other hand, look as though they're too busy to be asked the question right now about whether they know the answer, hoping that you won't go, right, you explain to me what the difference is. So just so everybody knows, and this is really useful, and I tell lawyers this as well. So a proposal is something that you're saying, subject to you agreeing these terms, we'll do this for a price. Now, the price that you might do something for is either a quote or an estimate, a quotation or an estimate. So a quotation is, I will come in and take that wall down, or I will come in and advise on your restructuring in your business for your employees for this amount of money. I will undertake these tasks. If you're doing that, you need to be very careful about what the scope of your work is. You need to describe what it is going to be, what it is not going to be. And also, this is where the technology bit comes in. There's something called DCAR. So dependencies, contingencies, assumptions, and responsibilities. So what is my work dependent on? It's dependent on you responding quickly to me, giving me the right information, that what you've told me is accurate. You know, what contingencies are there? What contingencies around this that could impact on it? What assumptions are we making? And who's responsible for what? Who am I communicating with? Who's responsible for making decisions? All of those things come into play. But that's sort of what should go into a quote. And you need to be really careful with that. The other thing is an estimate. So an estimate is, I think it'll cost this to take this wall down, but I don't know. Or I think it'll cost this to deal with the restructuring of your organization and the redeployment of people in your organization in terms of the work that I'll do. But it's an estimate. I don't know. Now, with an estimate, the assumption is that there's some wiggle room there, that it might be more. It could be less, but it might be more. The other thing with it is that if you're likely to be significantly higher than that estimate, you should go back and inform people and say, actually, we're now spending more time on this, so it's got more complex. Here's an updated scope. Here's updated information. So just reviewing that and keeping people aware of what's going on is really important. We all struggle with this at times. We all get this wrong, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. If you don't estimate appropriately and you don't update, then people are going to be upset when you send the bill in. If your quote's way off or it doesn't include half of the work that's involved and you haven't described the scope correctly, they're going to be unhappy with the bill you send in, none of which is good. The other thing that people are concerned with often in dealing with the consultants is, well, who owns the information? Who owns the data that's produced? Who owns the tools, the documentation, the things that you're using? So it's quite important to understand whether this is something that you're using as a toolkit that you want to reuse yourself, which is your stuff that you're deploying. And I think your term should reflect that I have a toolkit or things that I deploy which belong to me that I am licensing for your use in your organization for the purpose described in the quote or the estimate or the proposal. But it's mine and I can use it elsewhere. Or is this something specifically being created? So you're creating a new handbook, or you're creating some new materials for them, or you're creating some training materials. If a customer has those created for them and they're paying for them, they may well assume that they belong to them. Now, copyright assignment, starting point, copyright belongs to the person who creates it. So you need to be careful with that. Are you going to assign that to your customer? Is that what they expect? Or are you retaining it and licensing it, making it available for you to use? The other thing is that you don't want to leave it with them if they don't pay you. So the continuing license is reliant upon them continuing to pay you. So that's an important thing to have in place. That gives a bit of confidence and clarity as to who owns what. And of course, as HR consultancies, you're going to be creating all sorts of things potentially. You might be taking in your years of experience and producing training materials and information that you want to use elsewhere time and time again. So be clear about that. Don't leave it behind with the customer and regret it. The other thing, of course, is if you've got tools to deploy, sorry, I'm just going on a bit, Mary, then, there's nothing wrong with saying, and my toolkit costs this amount of money. I've spent a lot of time developing this. So you get my time, it costs this. I'll give you my toolkit as well, or this, and that's another additional amount per user, or it's a fixed amount of money for that toolkit.
Yeah, again, it's something we do try and encourage people to do, to look at productizing how they can, and how they can increase the scope of their business and the services they deliver through sort of types of productization and those sorts of activities. So looking at toolkits and packages and bundles and all those lovely things, because that does help them deliver.
And there's one other thing I think around that is that keeping abreast of changes in the law becomes very important with that. And that can be more difficult when you're on your own than if you're, part of a large organization where it's delivered to you. Obviously, HRI, larger organization, can keep up to speed with that and we can help with that. But there are changes coming down the path. So, the whistleblowing legislation, for example, across Europe and in other countries has been updated in recent times. That's under consultation at the moment. We're looking at what should be done with that and how that might be dealt with, as that law changes. And that law will change. And that could have a really big impact, I think, on what happens in not just the HR space, but all sorts of other related engagements that whistleblowing will become a factor, just as an example.
I think what's really evident, sorry Mary, to say what I think is really evident in our conversation today is how amazing the partnership is between Freeths and HRI. And actually how we really can together serve our members in the most amazing way.
And that's part of what we do. And, the way that we approach things, one of the reasons I chose Freeths, and I was lucky at this stage of sort of grey-haired bit of my career, as it were, to be able to, make some sort of positive decisions is, Freeths at the heart of it doesn't always get everything right. We're not always on the side of the angels, but we try. And we've just recently got our sort of B Corp accreditation or certification, which, is, quite an achievement for an organisation this size and complex to have that underpinning it in terms of its approach to how it does business and its aims and to operate on highest ethical and professional standards as it can, which we've now got to try and live up to, which is not as easy as the batch, but we'll give it the best shot.
I know the B Corp's quite difficult to get, so it's quite an achievement to get there. There's a lot of hoops to jump through to get the accreditation, so that's good work.
Yeah, a lot of work by a lot of people, but
Yeah.
I'm quite happy just to take the benefit of all of that hard work of other people. That's never a bad thing. So
No.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for a very informative discussion. I think loads of things to pause, reflect on, look at what we're doing within our respective businesses and how we're doing it, and loads of useful tips on how we can best structure ourselves, manage our customer expectations to make sure that our businesses are offering values to clients and delivering values to us ourselves. So thank you for your time. And so we are, as I said at the very beginning, going through this mini series looking at how to build resilience into your business. So please do listen to all the episodes in the mini series if you haven't already done so. And if you have any questions, suggestions, etc., would love to hear from you. Get in touch via hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. And if you have any burning topics that you want us to discuss, at the same vein, email us. And if you've loved listening to us, subscribe to our channels, share it in your social media. And until next time, take good care of yourselves. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.